He's a parasite living off my husband's money. My daughter said it to the whole table, gesturing at me with her wine glass. Her husband ran a mid-sized logistics firm he was proud of, and for 3 years, she'd made sure everyone believed I contributed nothing to this family. What she didn't know was that my holding company had spent the past 2 months quietly acquiring the firm her husband worked for. The deal closed that morning. Nobody at that table knew yet. The waiter was about to fix that. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you the same. One small thing before we start, drop a comment for me. Have you ever watched someone in your family pretend you don't exist and stayed silent anyway? Yes or no, I'd love to know. I read more of your words than you realize. A few details here are fictionalized for storytelling. The lesson at the heart of it is what matters most. My daughter stood up at a dinner she had spent 2 months planning, lifted a glass of wine that cost more than my first month's rent, and told a room of 18 people that her father was a parasite. She said it smiling. That was the part that got me. Not the word itself. I had heard variations of it for 7 years. But the smile, rehearsed and bright, as if she were delivering a punchline she had tested on friends first. Vivian Thornton Harding was 34 years old, and she stood at the head of a private dining table at Carnivino wearing a dress that cost more than the monthly rent I had paid on my first office in Henderson. She raised her glass and the amber light from the chandeliers caught the crystal and threw small gold flickers across the tablecloth. Her husband, Landon Harding, 37, a regional operations director at Ridgeline Freight Solutions, sat beside her with the easy pride of a man who believed every square foot of his life had been earned. He touched her elbow gently as she spoke. He did not know what was coming. Neither did she. "My father is," she began, pausing as if searching for kindness. "How do I put this gently? He's a parasite. A sweet one, but a parasite. Everything he has. My husband provided. I want you to hold on to that word. Parasite. Because in about 40 minutes, the woman who said it was going to learn what it actually cost her." Laughter moved across the table the way laughter does when people are not sure whether they are supposed to laugh. A few guests looked at their plates. Boyd Prescott, 58, managing partner at Prescott Gallagher Logistics Consulting. The man whose professional opinion could make or end a regional career, sat in the seat of honor beside Landon. He did not laugh. He picked up his bourbon and studied it the way a man studies something when he would rather study anything than the scene in front of him. I sat at the far corner. I was 69 years old, wearing a tweed sport coat I had owned for 11 years, and I smiled. That is what I trained myself to do. 7 years of practice. My wife, Constance, 66, a retired school librarian who once silenced a cafeteria of 212-year-olds with a look, sat beside me with her hands folded and her jaw set like a gate latch. 2 chairs down, my son Garrett, 40, gripped his water glass so hard I could see the white on his knuckles from across the table. "Mom, did she just—" Garrett whispered. Constance put her hand on his forearm. "Not yet." I picked up my water glass. I did not touch wine that evening. I had not touched wine all week. When you are about to do what I was about to do, you need every thought clean and every word deliberate. Have you ever watched your own child erase you in front of a room full of strangers and kept smiling because the alternative would have ruined everything you had spent 3 months building? I have. It is a very specific kind of patience. It is not forgiveness. It is not weakness. It is the patience of a man holding a hand he has no intention of showing until the pot is right. The room settled. Vivian moved on to praising Landon's work ethic, his promotions, the house in Southern Highlands he had earned through grit and talent. She did not mention that I had loaned them the down payment. She never mentioned it. She had unmade that fact the way she unmade everything about me, quietly, consistently, until the original version no longer existed in anyone's memory but mine. My phone buzzed once against my chest through the jacket pocket. One vibration. I did not look at it. I already knew what it said. That buzz was from Palmer Iverson, 45, my executive assistant and confidential deal coordinator for 12 years. A man who answered every call on the first ring with the flat calm of someone who had handled more zeros than most people would see in a lifetime. He was sitting in his downtown office at that moment, and he had sent me a single line. But to understand that line, I need to take you back 11 hours. That morning, I had been sitting in my home office in Summerlin South, a room my daughter had never once asked to see, when the phone rang at 8:57 a.m. Palmer's voice came through clean and level. "It's done, sir. 8:58 a.m. Ridgeline Freight Solutions is fully under Thornton equity as of this morning. $95 million. That is what the Parasite was worth as of 8:58 that morning. That is what the man at the corner table in the 11-year-old sport coat had just signed for, while his daughter was still asleep in the Southern Highlands house she believed her husband had paid for entirely on his own. I told Palmer there would be a dinner that night. My daughter's dinner. He would attend, but he would not speak until I told him to. "And if she says something about you again," Palmer asked. "She will," I said. "That's the point." I set the phone down and looked at the leather folio on my desk. Inside it were the acquisition papers for Ridgeline Freight Solutions, the company that employed my son-in-law, the company whose managing partner was about to sit at my daughter's table and watch her call me a parasite. Palmer would carry that folio into the private dining room at Carnavino in exactly 11 hours. And when the time came, he would place a single business card beside Vivian's plate and say 7 words that would end the version of her life she had built on top of my silence. But before any of that, I need to tell you how a man who started with 900 square feet in Henderson, Nevada, in 1984, ended up owning the company his own daughter used as proof that he was worthless. Because that story is the reason I did not flinch when she said it. And it is the reason she should have. You want to know what a parasite looks like at 28 years old, with $1,100 and a handshake lease on an office nobody else wanted? I will tell you. He looks like a man standing in 900 square feet on Warm Springs Road in Henderson, Nevada, in 1984, with one metal desk, one rotary phone, and a water stain on the ceiling tile directly above his head that he would stare at every morning for 3 years until he could afford to move. The filing cabinet was secondhand. I bought it from a machine shop that was closing down. I can still tell you the serial number if you give me a minute. That is the kind of thing you remember when every object in your life was earned one at a time. Constance taught 7th grade English at a middle school 14 miles away. Her salary kept the lights on. Mine kept the phone connected, when we could not afford a second line. I walked to the gas station on Boulder Highway and used the payphone for client calls. Unzer's something about a man who makes business calls from a gas station payphone. He is not embarrassed. He is building something that does not need an audience yet. The first acquisition came in 1991, a small warehousing company in North Las Vegas. 3 trucks, a lease on a lot the size of a tennis court. I bought it for $60,000 with money I had saved over 7 years of brokering freight contracts. By 1997, I had 4 companies. By 2003, I restructured everything under Thornton Equity Partners, a private holding company with my name on the incorporation papers and nobody else's. I never put my name on a building. I never hired a publicist. I never once walked into a room and announced what I was worth. $400 million in managed portfolio assets by 2024. Logistics, commercial real estate, industrial services, and I kept all of it behind the same face I wore to parent-teacher conferences and Little League games and every Thanksgiving dinner my daughter ever hosted. Because wealth that needs to announce itself is not wealth. It is insecurity with a bank account. I never told my children the exact number. I did not think it mattered. I believed that what you built spoke for itself, that the people who loved you would see the work without being shown the receipts. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about it for a very long time. Vivian grew up watching me leave the house at 5 in the morning and come home smelling like diesel and cardboard. She watched Constance clip coupons until 2004 because we lived below what we had on purpose, not because we had to. She watched me drive the same truck for 9 years. And somewhere in the gap between what I showed her and what I actually was, she built a version of me that made sense to the life she wanted. In that version, I was small. In that version, I needed her husband. She married Landon in 2019. He was a good man with a legitimate career, and I liked him. I loaned them the down payment on the house in Southern Highlands. And within a year, Vivian had rewritten that fact out of existence. By 2021, if you asked anyone in her circle about her father, they would have told you I was retired, living on a small pension. Fortunate that my son-in-law was generous enough to include me. She did not arrive at cruelty overnight. She rehearsed it. 3 weeks before the April dinner. Vivian sat in the dining room of that Southern Highlands house and spread ivory place cards across the marble table. She was organizing the celebration for Landon's expected recognition at Ridgeline. Flowers she had arranged herself stood in crystal vases at both ends. The linen tablecloth was pressed flat under her palms as she moved each card into position with the precision of someone who understood that seating was a language, and she intended to use it. Landon leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "Put Dad at the small table near the kitchen," she said without looking up. "He'll be fine. He doesn't know anyone important anyway." Landon paused. His fork, he had been eating an apple. Cutting it with a paring knife the way he always did, stopped mid-slice. "That feels wrong. Viv, he's your father. Your family's not like mine. Landon, trust me on this. When your own daughter rearranges furniture to make you invisible, the chairs are not the problem. The story she has been telling herself about you is." And Vivian had been telling that story so long she no longer remembered it was fiction. She set the last place card down mine, next to the kitchen door. As far from Boyd, Prescott, and the Ridgeline executives as the room allowed, and smoothed the tablecloth one final time. She told Landon her family was not like his. She meant it as an apology for where she came from. She had no idea how right she was. She did not know that the man she was seating in the corner had, that very week, begun the final phase of a $95 million acquisition of the company her husband worked for. She did not know that within 6 weeks, every person at that table would report, through a chain of signatures and board votes, to the man she had placed next to the kitchen. And she did not know that I had been keeping a record, not of the money, not of the deals, of every single time she had erased me. A small notebook, locked in the second drawer of my desk, with the first entry dated 7 years before this dinner. I opened it that night when we got home. Constance watched me from the hallway. She knew what was in it. She was the only one who did. The drawer had a brass lock the size of a thumbprint. I kept the key on a chain behind the desk clock where no one would think to look. Because no one ever came into my study looking for anything. That was the point. Constance stood in the doorway. She did not come in. She never came in when I opened that drawer. She knew what was inside. And she understood that some rituals belong to the person performing them. "You're going to the drawer again, aren't you?" she said. It was not a question. "I need to see them all in order." The notebook was small, spiral-bound. Brown cover cracked at the spine. The kind you could buy at any drugstore for $2. I started it 7 years ago. Picture what that looked like. A 62-year-old man sitting alone at midnight in a cone of desk lamp light, writing down the exact words his daughter used to erase him at her own wedding reception. Not because he wanted revenge, because he needed proof he was not imagining it. The first entry was dated June 14, 2018. Vivian's wedding. I wrote it in blue ink the night we came home, while Constance ran a bath and pretended she had not heard what I heard. The entry was 3 sentences long. Reception at the Wynn. Vivian introduced me to the Harding family as my father. He ran a little office that never really went anywhere. She was standing 4 feet from me when she said it. That was the first time. I told myself it was nerves. Wedding jitters, a young woman trying to impress her new in-laws. I forgave it before the ink dried. The second entry was dated November 2019. Thanksgiving at the Southern Highlands house. Vivian had volunteered to host. I brought 2 bottles of wine, a Barolo I had been saving, the kind you do not find at a grocery store. She set them on the counter without looking at the labels. Later, while I was refilling water glasses in the kitchen, I heard her tell Landon's mother in the dining room that I could not afford to contribute to the meal. I wrote it down that night. She told Mrs. Harding I couldn't afford the wine. I brought the wine. How many times does your own child have to rewrite who you are in front of strangers before you stop calling it a misunderstanding and start calling it what it is? The third entry was April 2021. My grandson's second birthday party. Vivian had invited neighbors, school parents, the circle she was building in Southern Highlands. I parked my truck in the driveway, the same truck I had driven for 12 years, the one that ran perfectly because I maintained it myself. I was walking up the path when I heard her say to a woman on the porch, "That's my dad's. I keep telling him we'll help him get something decent. But you know how older men are with their cars." She laughed. The woman laughed. I walked past both of them and said hello and did not mention that the truck was paid for in cash the year Vivian was still borrowing gas money. The fourth entry was Christmas 2023. This one I wrote slowly, because I wanted to get every word right. We were at the Harding's house. Landon's mother, a kind woman who always made a point to ask about my work, turned to me during dessert and said she would love to hear about my business. Before I could answer, Vivian leaned across the table and said, "Dad never really built anything worth mentioning, Mom. He's happier that way." 6 feet. She said it from 6 feet away. She did not lower her voice. She did not glance at me first to see if I had heard. She did not need to, because by then I was furniture. I was the old sport coat in the corner, the quiet man with the water glass, the father who never corrected her because correcting her would have meant admitting what she had become. 5 entries, 5 events, 5 rooms full of people who heard it happen. Not one of them ever said a word to me afterward. Not one of them pulled me aside and asked if I was all right. That is what erasure does. It does not just remove you from the story. It removes you from everyone else's willingness to notice. I turned to the last page. Tonight's entry, April 12, 2025. I had not written it yet. The pen was in the drawer beside the notebook. Same blue ink. Same brand I had used for every entry because some things deserve consistency even when they are painful. I wrote it in 4 sentences. The words she used. The number of people in the room. The fact that Boyd Prescott was sitting 3 chairs away when she said it. The fact that I smiled. A mistake is one bad night. A pattern is a decision someone keeps making because no one has ever made them stop. I read the 5 entries front to back. And what I saw was not a daughter losing her temper. It was a system. She was not getting careless, she was getting bolder. Each event was louder than the last. Each audience larger. Each version of me smaller. Until the word she reached for at Carnavino was the one that finally named what she had been building for 7 years. I closed the notebook and set it on the desk. The spiral binding caught my thumb the way it always did. I looked at Constance standing in the doorway, her hand resting on the frame, the hallway light behind her. "How many is it now?" she asked. 5. Tonight makes 5. She waited. 4 times was enough to understand, I said. Tonight was the 5th. It will be the last. Constance held my eyes for a long moment. Then she nodded once, turned off the hallway light, and went to bed. She did not ask what I was going to do. She already knew that when I said something would be the last time, I had already figured out how. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the study until the desk lamp started competing with daylight through the blinds. And by then I knew what I was going to do. Not the details, those would come, but the shape of it. The shape was patience, with an expiration date. The next morning I called my son. Not the one who had called me a parasite, but the one who had never once called me anything except Dad. Garrett met me at Makers and Finders in the Arts District at 9 o'clock. The place was half full, morning light cutting across the concrete floor in long, clean strips. He was already sitting at a table near the window when I arrived. 2 black coffees ordered, no sugar, no cream. He knew how I took it. He had known since he was 14. Before I sat down, he slid a white envelope across the reclaimed wood table. $342, he said. The mechanic gave me a receipt if you want it. 3 weeks earlier. I had asked Garrett to take my truck to a shop near his apartment for a brake job. I handed him $400 in cash because I did not know the exact cost. He could have kept the difference. Most people would have. His sister would have kept the difference and forgotten there was a difference keep. There are 2 kinds of children. The ones who return the envelope and the ones who never knew there was an envelope to begin with. I opened it. Inside was $58 in bills and a handwritten receipt folded in half, still warm from his jacket pocket. $342. Returned to the penny. Without being asked. Without a thought that it should be any other way. I put the envelope in my breast pocket and drank my coffee and tried not to think about the contrast. But the contrast was the whole point of this meeting, even if Garrett did not know it yet. You look tired. Dad, he said. Are you sleeping? I'm fine. That's what you say when you're not fine. He was right. It was exactly what I said when I was not fine. My son had been watching me more carefully than I realized. And the fact that he noticed my sleep and not my net worth told me everything I needed to know about which of my children understood what mattered. Remember that receipt. $342. Folded in half inside a plain white envelope. Because later in this story, when you see what loyalty earns a person, it started right here, at a coffee shop table with a man who thought returning $58 was so obvious it did not deserve a conversation. We talked for another 20 minutes. He told me about a property management contract he was chasing. I told him his mother was repainting the guest bathroom. Neither of us mentioned what happened at the dinner. Garrett had the decency to wait for me to bring it up, and I had the discipline not to. Not yet. I drove home and went straight to the study. Palmer arrived at 11, carrying the leather portfolio he used for transactions that required no logo and no attention. He set it on my desk and opened it without ceremony. Everything is filed, he said. The former board signed NDAs last Wednesday. Ridgeline's staff, including your son-in-law, has no idea the ownership structure changed. I looked at the documents. Clean signatures, notarized seals, filing stamps from the Nevada Secretary of State. The acquisition had closed the previous morning, and the company my daughter used as proof of her husband's superiority now sat inside a holding structure that traced back through 3 layers of legal architecture to the man she had seated next to the kitchen. How long can we hold it quiet? Legally, the public filing hits in 6 weeks. Internally, as long as the board cooperates, he paused. Which they will. What kind of man holds that much leverage over his own daughter's world and still leaves the door open for her to walk through it on her own terms? I will tell you. The same kind of man who used a gas station payphone for business calls and never once complained about it? Patience is not passivity. Patience is knowing exactly how much power you have and choosing for as long as you can stand it, not to use it. When do you want to go public? Palmer asked. I'll give her one more chance to fix it herself. If she doesn't, then we do it at a time and place where she cannot rewrite what happened. Palmer nodded. He understood. He had worked for me long enough to know that I did not make threats. I made plans. and the plans only activated when every other option had been exhausted. He closed the portfolio, stood, and walked to the study door. Then he turned back. One more thing. Your daughter called the office yesterday. She left a message for you. I had not checked my voicemail in 2 days. The phone on my desk had a blinking light I had been ignoring since the night of the dinner. What did she want? Palmer's expression did not change. He delivered it the way he delivered everything, flat, precise, and without editorializing. She wants to make sure you don't embarrass her at the next dinner. The room was very quiet after he said that. The study clock ticked. The blinds shifted in the air conditioning. I could hear the neighbor's sprinklers start up through the closed window. I had offered my daughter one more chance. One final opening to call me. To say something kind. To acknowledge what she had done in front of 18 people at Carnavino. And she had used that opening to leave a voicemail instructing me on how to be more invisible. I picked up the pen on my desk. I did not open the notebook. I did not need to. The 6th entry would never be written because there would never be a 6th time. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I deleted it. Not because I wanted to forget what she said, but because I did not need a recording. Every word was already filed in the part of my memory that stores things my daughter does not know I keep. Have you ever listened to your own daughter give you instructions on how to be invisible and realized she was handing you the blueprint for the exact opposite? 3 days later, on April 16, the phone rang. Vivian's name on the screen. Late afternoon, the sun coming through the study blinds in long stripes across the desk, where the spiral notebook still sat from 2 nights ago. I answered on the 3rd ring because answering on the 1st would have seemed eager, and answering on the 5th would have seemed angry, and I was neither. I was ready. She did not say hello. She said, "Dad, I need to go over some things for the May dinner." Not, "How are you?" Not, "I've been thinking about what I said." Not the word sorry, which has 4 letters and takes less than a second to say, and which my daughter has never once directed at me in 7 years of needing to. Listen to what she did not say during that phone call. Because the absence was louder than anything she did say. She did not mention the April dinner. She did not acknowledge the word she had used in front of 18 people. She called to give me logistics, marching orders, stage directions for the next performance. Landon is being recognized formally by Boyd Prescott's firm on May 3rd, she said. We're doing it at Carnavino again, private dining room. It's a bigger event this time. Boyd is bringing 3 of Landon's regional directors and some of the consulting partners. She listed the names. Boyd Prescott. 3 regional directors whose titles I already knew because their org charts sat in a filing cabinet in Palmer's office. 2 consulting partners from Prescott Gallagher. The full Harding family. And then the final instruction. Please don't bring up your little company, Dad. It's not that kind of room. Boyd doesn't need to hear about whatever it is you used to do. Just sit, smile, be pleasant. That's all I'm asking. I can do that, I said, and I meant it. Every word. She talked for 12 minutes. I did not interrupt once. She told me where to sit, what to wear. Something understated, Dad, not that old jacket. And who not to approach. She was specific. She was organized. She was, in her own way, impressive. The way a general is impressive when you watch the precision of the campaign, even though you know the war is already lost. She read me the names of every person who would watch her world change on May 3rd. And she did it while telling me to keep my mouth shut when the call ended. I sat in the leather chair, with the phone still warm in my hand. The screen had not gone dark yet. Vivian's name was still there, fading. I did not move for perhaps 30 seconds. I was not processing emotion. I was processing information. My daughter had just provided me with a complete guest roster. Every Ridgeline executive who needed to hear the truth would be seated in one room, at one dinner, on one evening that my daughter had organized and paid for with her husband's salary from a company she did not know I owned. when someone hands you the seating chart to their own undoing and asks you to say thank you. You do not correct them. You say thank you. I pressed Palmer's number before the screen went dark. He answered the way he always did. First ring, no greeting. She called, I said. And Boyd Prescott. 3 regional directors, consulting partners from Prescott Gallagher, the full Harding family, May 3rd, Carnavino, private dining room. I could hear Palmer writing it down, his pen scratching across whatever legal pad was closest. She gave me every name we needed. She told you to stay quiet, Palmer said. It was not a guess. She told me to wear something understated and not talk about my little company. A pause. Palmer did not laugh. Palmer never laughed at things that were not funny. But I could hear the shift in his breathing. The particular silence of a man who has spent 12 years working for someone and still finds himself occasionally stunned by how precisely the universe delivers its ironies. You're certain about the timing, he said. May 3rd, during the dinner. She told me to sit quietly and not embarrass her. I intend to do exactly one of those things. Which one? The sitting. Another pause. Then, what do you need from me? A business card. Clean, simple. My name, the holding company, the title. Nothing else. And the leather folio with the acquisition summary 1 page. The relevant signatures. The effective date. You walk in at the time I specify. You place the card on the table and you say 7 words. We will rehearse those 7 words until they sound like you've said them 1,000 times. And then you leave. The card does the rest. I told him to prepare everything. I told him May 3rd was the date and there would be no postponement and no second guessing. He said he understood. He did. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my study for a long time. The striped shadows from the blinds had moved 3 inches across the desk since Vivian's call. The notebook sat where I had left it. I did not open it. There would be no 6th entry. My daughter had handed me the room, the audience, and the date. She had told me to sit in a corner and say nothing. And the strangest part was that she was half right. I would sit exactly where she put me. I just would not be the one who stayed silent. 2 days passed. The plan sat in my chest like a second heartbeat, steady and patient. And on the evening of April 18th, I decided I could not carry it alone anymore. Not because I was weak, because Constance deserved to know. And I had already made the mistake of thinking silence was the same thing as protection. I had kept secrets from Constance exactly twice in 42 years of marriage. Once about a surprise anniversary trip to Lake Tahoe that she figured out in 11 minutes because I am a terrible liar about happy things. And once about a $95 million acquisition of my son-in-law's company that I had managed to keep hidden for 6 days because I am, apparently, a much better liar about painful ones. I closed the study door. She was already sitting in the leather chair across from my desk. The one she sat in whenever I said the words, "We need to talk," which in 4 decades I had said fewer times than I could count on one hand. The lamp threw soft light across her face. The spiral notebook was visible in the still-open drawer between us. A cup of tea sat on the corner of the desk, poured an hour earlier, untouched. Neither of us would reach for it. I bought Landon's company, I said. The paperwork closed 6 days ago. Vivian doesn't know. Landon doesn't know. And on May 3rd, Palmer is going to walk into that dining room and tell them, "I want to tell you something about a woman who taught middle schoolers to love books for 32 years. When she goes quiet, it is not because she has nothing to say. It is because she has already decided and is waiting for you to catch up." Constance did not speak for a long time. She looked at the open drawer where the notebook sat. She looked at the desk where my hands were flat against the wood. She looked at me the way she has looked at me since 1983, which is the look of a woman who chose a man and has never once regretted the choice, even when the man made it difficult. Then she said, "You should have told me sooner." I needed every fact in place before I put this weight on you. The weight was already on me. Eugene. Her voice did not crack. It did not rise. It simply carried the specific gravity of a truth she had been holding alone. I watched her call you that word, and I had to sit there holding a napkin. I couldn't look at Garrett. I couldn't look at anyone. I sat there, and I folded that napkin into a perfect square, because if I let go of it, I was going to say something that would have ended my relationship with my daughter in front of 18 strangers. She said the weight was already on me, and I understood for the first time that I had not been protecting her by keeping quiet. I had been leaving her alone with the same wound and no explanation for it. That is a particular kind of cruelty, the unintentional kind. And it is no less cruel for being well-meaning. I told her everything. The acquisition structure, Palmer's role, the business card that would be placed beside Vivian's plate, the 7 words. The guest list Vivian had handed me 3 days earlier without knowing she was reading me a witness roster. I told her about the notebook, every entry, every date, every word Vivian had used to erase me since the wedding in 2018. Constance already knew about most of them. She had been in the room for all but one. I know what she said at Christmas, Constance said quietly. I know what she said about the truck. I know about the wine. I was there, Eugene. The difference is, you wrote it down, and I carried it. 42 years of marriage is not a conversation. It is a language. And Constance and I had been speaking it long enough that she heard everything I had not said in the 6 days since that dinner. She heard it in the way I had not slept. She heard it in the way I held my coffee cup at breakfast, too tightly, staring at the backyard without seeing it. She heard the plan forming before I ever said it out loud. "Are you asking my permission?" she said. "No. I'm asking you to be there. I was always going to be there." She stood up. She crossed to my side of the desk, which was something she almost never did because the desk was my territory and the kitchen was hers, and we had respected that geography for decades. She put her hand over mine. Her fingers smelled like lavender, the same hand cream she had used for 20 years, and she said the thing I had not expected. "You've waited long enough. This time. I'm beside you from the start." I thought that was the end of it. I thought she would go back to the kitchen and we would carry this together in the quiet way we had carried everything else. But she did not move. She stood there, her hand on mine, and said one more thing. "I don't want to sit across the room from her when it happens. I want to be right next to her. She should see my face when she finds out what her father is actually worth." I looked at the woman I had married in 1983. 66 years old, retired, 5'4". And in that moment, she was the most formidable person I had ever shared a room with. I had spent 6 days thinking I was the one with the plan. But Constance had been planning too. The difference was, she had been planning since the night of the dinner, and she had been waiting for me to catch up. I had underestimated her, the same way Vivienne had underestimated me. And in that moment I understood that whatever happened on May 3rd, Constance and I would walk into that room the way we had walked into every room for 42 years. Together, side by side. The only difference was that this time the room was going to find out what that actually meant. Constance and I spent the next 2 days refining the plan together. And what struck me was how naturally she stepped into it. Not as a passenger, but as an architect who had been drawing her own version of the blueprint since the night of the dinner, and had simply been waiting for mine to arrive. But while I was preparing from my study in Summerlin, my son-in-law was walking past a conference room at Ridgeline Freight Solutions and noticing that the chairs were full of people he had never seen before. Landon told me this later, after everything. On the morning of April 20th, he arrived at the North Las Vegas headquarters the way he always did, early. Briefcase in one hand, vending machine coffee in the other. The kind of lukewarm, bitter cup you grab when your mind is already 3 meetings ahead and you do not care what you are drinking. He walked down the main corridor toward his office and stopped. The executive conference room had its frosted glass doors closed. Through the panels he could see silhouettes 4, maybe 5 people seated around the table. He did not recognize any of them. Attorneys, judging by the posture and the document stacks. Outgoing board members sat across from them. I need you to picture my son-in-law standing in that hallway. A good man. A competent man who had built the logistics division from 14 routes to over 200. Standing outside a closed door in his own building. Pressing his palm against the doorframe as if testing whether the floor beneath him was still solid. And having no idea that his father-in-law was on the other side of it. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. He found Deborah Stiles at her desk down the hall. Deborah was Ridgeline's company secretary, 53. The kind of woman who had outlasted 3 CEOs in 9 years by knowing exactly which information was above her clearance and never pretending otherwise. Who are those people in the boardroom? Landon asked. I wasn't notified about any meetings today. Deborah looked up from her screen with the practiced neutrality of someone who had been briefed and instructed. New controlling shareholder, she said. That's all I've been told. The name is confidential until the formal announcement. New controlling shareholder, Landon repeated. That's what I said. Mr. Harding. He stood there for a moment longer. He looked back down the corridor at the frosted glass. Then he went to his office, closed his own door, and sat with a feeling he could not name this entirely his to understand. He did not connect it to me. Why would he? The man his wife had seated next to the kitchen door 8 days earlier was a retired nobody with a little office that never went anywhere. The idea that I might be on the other side of those frosted doors, through 3 layers of legal architecture and a confidentiality agreement, would not have occurred to him any more than it would have occurred to Vivienne. That was the morning. The next afternoon, Palmer came to my study. He carried a slim manila folder, thinner than the acquisition portfolio, but heavier in a different way. He set it on the desk beside the spiral notebook, which had not moved from its spot since the night I wrote the 5th entry. I made some calls, he said. 3 people, your sister-in-law, your cousin on the Thornton side, and a friend from your Rotary chapter. I contacted each one independently. None of them spoke to each other. And 3 people confirmed the same thing, sir. She's been doing this to your whole family. 8 times. 8 rooms. 8 tables full of people who watched my daughter rewrite me into nothing. And not a single one of them said a word until Palmer knocked on their door and asked. I opened the folder. 3 typed summaries, each paper clipped to a single page. Constance's sister remembered a Thanksgiving in 2020 where Vivian told the table I had never really had a head for business. My cousin remembered a baptism in 2021 where Vivian apologized for my truck being parked in the driveway because it brought down the look of things. A man I had known through the Rotary Club for 15 years remembered a 4th of July barbecue in 2022, where Vivian told his wife that her father lived off Landon's good graces. When 3 people who have never spoken to each other tell you the exact same story about your own daughter, do you still call it a misunderstanding? Or do you finally call it what it is? I ran my thumb across the edge of the folder. 3 new confirmations. My notebook had 5. 8 separate occasions in 7 years. Each one a room where my daughter performed the same act. The erasure of her father for a different audience, with different words. And the same result. Nobody said anything. Nobody pushed back. Nobody called me afterward to tell me what they had heard. I set the folder beside the notebook on the desk. 5 entries on one side, 3 witness statements on the other. I looked at the evidence and felt something I had not expected. Not rage, not vindication. A strange, bone-deep exhaustion. The kind that comes when you finally stop hoping you were wrong about something you always knew was true. The study was quiet. The air conditioning hummed, the leather chair creaked as I leaned back. Then Constance appeared in the doorway. She had her phone in her hand and a look on her face that I had seen exactly twice before. Once when Garrett broke his collarbone at 16, and once when her mother died.
Garrett called, she said. He wants to come over this weekend. He says something happened with Vivian.
I looked at the notebook. I looked at the folder. And now my son, the one who returned envelopes and never asked for anything, was calling to tell me he had seen it too. Garrett did not come over that weekend. What happened was simpler and, in its own way, worse. He had been at his apartment on a Sunday afternoon when Vivienne stopped by, unannounced. She did that sometimes. Dropped in on Garrett the way you drop in on someone you consider an extension of yourself, rather than a separate person. I happened to be there too. I had driven over to help Garrett look at a leaking faucet. The kind of small errand fathers and sons use as an excuse to spend an afternoon together, without admitting that is what they are doing. The three of us ended up in his kitchen. Garrett had made pot roast rosemary and garlic. The kind of meal a man cooks for himself without any performance to it. Vinian leaned against the counter with her arms crossed and her nails tapping the granite the way they always did when she was in a room she considered beneath her usual setting. The conversation was nothing. Weather, schedules, a cousin's upcoming graduation. Then Vivian turned to Garrett and said, with the bright laugh she used when she wanted something to sound affectionate instead of cruel, "Dad still calls it a company. It's cute. Landon's the one actually running something." Garrett's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Consider what it feels like when your own son calls you at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night not to chat. Not to ask a favor, but because he watched your daughter take a piece of you in front of him, and he could not pretend it did not happen. I was home by then. Constance had already told me Garrett wanted to come by. But instead he called. The line was quiet for a moment after I picked up. Then he said it. "Dad? Are you okay? I mean, really?" "I'm fine." "You always say that. But today I watched her say it to your face, and you didn't even blink. That's not fine." He was right. I had not blinked. I had trained myself not to blink for 7 years, and the training had become so complete that my own son could not tell whether I was absorbing the blow or whether I had stopped feeling it. The answer was neither. I felt every word. I just filed it in the same place I filed all the others, the locked drawer, the spiral notebook, the blue ink. But here was the difference. In 7 years and 8 documented occasions, not one person had ever looked me in the eye afterward and asked if I was okay. Not Constance's sister. Not my cousin. Not the Rotary friend. They had all heard it. And they had all chosen the comfort of pretending they had not. Garrett chose differently. My son had done something no one else in my family had managed in 7 years. He had seen it happen and refused to look away. "I'm handling it," I told him. "Are you?" he said. "Because I'm not sure I am." We talked for 11 minutes. He did not ask me what I was going to do. He did not offer to confront Vivian. He asked if I was all right. And he waited for an honest answer. And when I gave him one that was slightly more honest than my usual deflection, he accepted it and said goodnight. That was enough. That was more than enough. Have you ever sat alone at midnight with a plan that could change everything and asked yourself whether you are the hero of this story or just another father who let his pride make the decision for him? I sat in the study that night, with the desk lamp on and the rest of the house dark. Constance was asleep. The notebook sat in the open drawer. Palmer's folder with its 3 witness statements sat beside it. I looked at the phone on my desk and thought about calling Palmer to cancel everything. The thought was specific. It had weight and shape. What if exposing Vivian at that dinner did not teach her anything? What if it only humiliated her the way she had humiliated me? And the cycle continued, with different people in different chairs. What if I was not correcting a wrong, but repeating one? I picked up the notebook. I held it open to the first page for a long time. June 2018. Her wedding. The man who wrote that entry was not angry. He was heartbroken. He was sitting alone at midnight, hoping that one entry would be the only page he would ever need. But it was not the only page. There were 4 more after it, each one louder, each one bolder, each one delivered in a room where I was present and visible, and treated as though I were neither. I read all 5 entries. I read Palmer's 3 statements, 8 occasions, 8 rooms, and I asked myself the question one final time. Was I doing this because I was hurt? Or because the hurt had lasted long enough to become something that required an answer? The notebook answered for me. Not with emotion, with evidence, 5 entries in my handwriting, 3 independent witnesses. A daughter who had been given every opportunity to stop and had instead called my office to make sure I knew how to be properly invisible at her next event. I closed the notebook and placed it in the center of my desk, squared against the edges like a document waiting to be filed. No, I said to the empty room. This time will be different. Then I picked up my phone. Not to call Palmer, to set a single reminder for April 25th. One word. Invitations. Because in 2 days, my daughter was going to send me a piece of cream-colored cardstock that told me exactly where to sit, what to wear, and who not to talk to. And I was going to accept every instruction on it. Every single one. The invitation arrived on a Friday afternoon in a cream-colored envelope with Ridgeline Freight Solutions embossed in the corner. My company's logo. On my daughter's stationery, inviting me to sit quietly in a room I already owned. I stood at the kitchen counter and opened it carefully. The way you open something you already know the contents of, but want to experience anyway. The envelope had a faint floral scent, Vivian's signature touch for formal events. A spray of something expensive on the paper before sealing it. Inside was a single card. Heavy stock. Printed in a clean serif font, with the details of the May 3rd dinner at Carnavino. On the back, handwritten in Vivian's looping cursive, was the guest list. Boyd Prescott. 3 regional directors whose names I recognized from Ridgeline's organizational chart, which now sat in my filing cabinet. The full Harding family. 2 consulting partners. And at the bottom, a handwritten note in the same cursive, "Please wear something understated. Dad. This is Landon's night." I ran my thumb across her handwriting and felt the indentation where the pen had pressed into the cardstock. It was the same handwriting that once spelled out, "Best Dad Ever," on a construction paper card taped to my office door in 1997. Same loops on the capital D. Same slight leftward slant. The woman who wrote this invitation and the girl who made that card shared penmanship and nothing else. Every name I needed was listed in my daughter's own hand. Boyd Prescott, the managing partner whose professional opinion carried weight in every logistics firm west of the Mississippi. The regional directors who reported through a chain they did not yet understand, to me. The Harding family, who had spent 6 years hearing Vivian's version of her father and had never once been offered the real one. My daughter had assembled the complete witness roster for her own reckoning, printed it on the back of an invitation, and mailed it to the man she was reckoning against. She even picked the font, I said to Constance, who was reading her own copy at the other end of the counter. Constance looked up. She picked the font, the seating, the menu, and the man she wants to humiliate. The only thing she didn't pick is the ending. If you have ever had to plan the exact moment your own family learns the truth about you, you will understand why the details matter more than the emotion. Emotion gets talked over. Emotion gets rewritten in the retelling. But a business card sitting on a table beside a plate of food is a fact, and facts do not change their story depending on who is in the room. The next morning, Palmer came to the study. We sat across the desk from each other with 2 cups of black coffee, the only ritual we had shared across 12 years of quiet transactions. And we built the clock. "Walk me through it," I said. Palmer set a prototype business card on the desk between us, holding it between 2 fingers the way a dealer holds a playing card. It was simple. My name, the title, the holding company. No phone number, no address. No decoration. A card designed to do one thing, sit on a tablecloth and be undeniable. "I arrive at approximately 8:35, he said. Tailored suit, no briefcase. I look like a late guest, not a lawyer. I walk directly to the head table where Vivian and Landon are seated. I place this card beside Vivian's plate, face up. Then I say one sentence, audible to the room, and step back. "What's the sentence?" He tapped each word on the desk as he said it. "Ridgeline Freight Solutions reports directly to Mr. Thornton." That's 8 words. 7, if I drop the now. Drop it. Palmer and I were not building a confrontation. We were building a clock. And on May 3rd, at 8:35 in the evening, it was going to strike once. Clearly. And the entire room would hear it. No folder of evidence. No legal summary. No raised voice. A single card and 7 words. The delivery mechanism would be as quiet and as devastating as the man it represented. We spent an hour on variables. What if Vivian tried to speak over Palmer? He would not engage. What if Landon stood up? Palmer would address him by name, calmly, and repeat the sentence. What if Boyd Prescott asked for verification? Palmer would direct him to me. Every scenario ended the same way, with a business card on the table and a room full of people looking at the man in the corner. "And if she reacts badly," Palmer said, "the truth will speak for itself." He nodded. He slid the prototype card back into his breast pocket and stood. At the study door, he paused, the way he always did when something practical had occurred to him during a meeting, and he had been waiting for the right moment to mention it. "One more variable," he said. "Your son-in-law has been asking questions at Ridgeline. The closed-door meetings, the new shareholder. He pulled Deborah Stiles aside twice this week. He's getting closer." I thought about Landon standing in that hallway 6 days earlier, pressing his hand against the conference room door frame. A good man. A smart man. The kind of man who notices when the ground beneath him shifts. He was not going to stop asking. How close? He doesn't have a name yet. But he knows there is one. I nodded slowly. Then we'd better hope he doesn't figure it out before the appetizers. Palmer left. I sat in the study with the invitation on one side of the desk and the prototype card on the other. My daughter's handwriting on the left. My name in clean print on the right. 2 pieces of paper. 2 versions of the same man. On May 3rd, the room would decide which one was real. But I already knew. I had known since 1984. Landon did not figure it out. Not because he stopped looking, but because the legal architecture Palmer had built was designed by a man who had spent 12 years making things invisible for me. And Landon was searching with the wrong tools in the wrong direction. He thought the new shareholder was a private equity firm out of Los Angeles. He was half right about the private equity part. While my son-in-law chased shadows at Ridgeline, my daughter walked into Carnavino on May 1st and built a room designed to make me disappear. I was not there. Palmer told me afterward, detail by detail, because Palmer understood that the details were the point. Vivian arrived at the restaurant in the early afternoon. While the private dining room was still in setup mode, bare tables, chairs unstacked, the kitchen staff clattering through lunch service behind the swinging door. She brought a printed seating chart and a level of focus that most people reserve for weddings or funerals. She walked the room with the events manager, a young woman with a clipboard who followed Vivian's finger as it pointed from table to table. Boyd Prescott and the Ridgeline directors at the head table. The Harding family in the center. Consulting partners flanking Landon. And then, at the far end of the room, wedged between the kitchen service door and the emergency exit, a 2-person table that looked like it had been added as an afterthought. "My father's older," Vivian told the manager. "He likes quiet. Put him near the back. He won't mind." Picture that dining room. 18 chairs arranged by a woman who spent more time deciding where to hide her father than she spent deciding what to serve for dinner. She positioned me where the kitchen noise would drown out conversation, where the foot traffic of servers carrying trays would pass between my table and everyone else's, where a man could sit for an entire evening and not be spoken to by anyone who mattered. She wanted me present enough to count and invisible enough not to matter.
The events manager hesitated.
That table only seats 2. Wouldn't he be more comfortable at the...
He'll be fine, Vivian said.
Trust me.
She did not know that the man she was seating next to the kitchen door owned the kitchen,
the dining room, and the company whose logo was printed on the invitation.
She did not know that in 48 hours,
the smallest table in the room would become the only one anyone remembered. My daughter built a seating chart the way some people build alibis, carefully, with the exits already planned, making sure the one person who could disrupt the story was positioned where no one would think to look. That evening, I called Garrett to my study. He came straight from work, still in the blazer he wore to property showings, and sat in the chair across from my desk. The same chair Constance had sat in 2 weeks earlier when I told her everything. The same chair that had held more confessions in the last month than it had in the previous decade. I did not tell Garrett about the acquisition. Not yet. What I told him was simpler and, in its own way, larger. I want you to start thinking about what it would look like if you ran the day-to-day at Thornton Equity. Not someday. Soon. He stared at me. Garrett is not a man who stares. He is a man who processes, considers, responds. But this time he stared, and the silence in the study stretched long enough that I could hear the neighbor's sprinklers through the window. Dad, why now? What's changed? Nothing's changed. I've been watching you for 20 years. The difference is, now I need you to know that I was watching. When I told him I had been watching for 20 years, I meant every word. Every cleared gutter on a Saturday morning without being asked. Every receipt returned to the penny. Every Sunday phone call that started with, "How are you, Dad?" and meant it. 20 years of a son showing up, not because there was something to gain, but because showing up was who he was. "Does this have something to do with Vivian?" he asked quietly. "It has to do with you. That's what matters." He did not push further. He sat with it the way he sat with everything, patiently, without demanding more than was offered. I walked him to the study door and put my hand on his shoulder. Brief, firm. The way men say things they cannot put into words and trust the weight of a hand to carry the message. At the door he turned back. That same pause, that same half-turn. Everyone in my life seemed to deliver their most important information while standing in that doorway. "Dad," he said. "Vivian called me yesterday. She and Landon are thinking about relocating to Phoenix after the promotion goes through. She said they'd be gone by June." He said it like small talk, like a scheduling note, a footnote to the evening. It was not a footnote. It was an ultimatum I had not seen coming. Phoenix. Gone by June. If Vivian and Landon moved to Arizona before the truth came out, the dinner on May 3rd was not just a good night for the revelation. It was the only night. There would be no second event. No future gathering where Boyd Prescott and the Ridgeline directors and the full Harding family would sit in the same room with the man Vivian had been erasing for 7 years. After June, the audience would scatter. The witness list would dissolve, and my daughter would move to a new city and start the same performance with a new set of people who had never heard of me. I stood in the doorway after Garrett left and looked back at the study. The invitation on the desk, the notebook in the drawer, the business card prototype in Palmer's pocket, and now a ticking clock I had not built, but could not ignore. May 3rd was no longer a choice. It was a deadline. I told Constance about Phoenix that same evening. She did not need to hear it twice. Constance is not a woman who raises her voice. In 42 years, I have heard her shout exactly once. Had a referee during Garrett's Little League game in 1993 who made a call so bad that even the opposing coach winced. So when she walked into my study, with her jaw set and her hands shaking, I did not need her to explain. Something had shifted. She called me, Constance said. 14 minutes. 20 about the dinner menu. Whether the Ridgeline people prefer red or white. Whether the appetizers should be passed or plated. And then, at the very end, like she was reading off a grocery list, she said they're moving to Phoenix, mid-June. Landon's promotion comes with a regional transfer, and Vivian wants a fresh start. A fresh start, I repeated. Her words. A fresh start. New house, new neighborhood, new social circle. She didn't ask if we wanted to visit before they left. She didn't ask if we'd miss the grandchildren, 3 of them now. She spent more time on the wine list than on saying goodbye to her parents. I need you to understand what it sounds like when your daughter tells your wife she is moving 1,000 miles away and treats it like a scheduling update. It sounds like the end of something, not loud, not dramatic, but the quiet kind of ending where a door closes so gently you almost miss the click. Constance sat down in the chair across from my desk. She still had the phone in her hand, screen dark, knuckles white. I could smell the dinner she had been preparing before the call came in. Something with garlic and rosemary, abandoned on the counter mid-chop. The evening desert air pushed through the cracked study window, dry and cooling, carrying the mineral scent of a Las Vegas night settling in. She mentioned it between the appetizer order and the seating confirmation, Constance said. Right there in the middle, like it weighed the same. Past appetizers, Phoenix relocation, white wine for the fish course. That's how she told me we're losing our daughter. When someone announces they are leaving your life in 2 sentences wedged between appetizer preferences and a wine list, do you call that a conversation? Or a farewell that was never meant to land? Constance looked at me with an expression I had seen only a handful of times in 4 decades. It was not anger. Anger would have been simpler. It was the look of a woman who had held herself steady through 7 years of watching her daughter dismantle her husband in public, who had folded napkins and swallowed responses, and trusted that patience would eventually produce a reckoning, and who had just learned that patience had an expiration date she had not been told about. Eugene, she said, and her voice was low and final in a way that left no room for discussion. If they move to Phoenix, she starts this over with people who have never met you. She builds the same story in a new city with a new audience, and nobody there will ever know what she did, because nobody there was in the room when she said it. She was right. I had been thinking the same thing since Garrett told me. But hearing Constance say it out loud gave it the weight of a verdict. Before I tell you what happened next, before I explain how a 2-word text message set the final 48 hours in motion, I need to ask you something. If you are still with me right now, comment whether you think what I did next was justified or whether I crossed a line, and tell me why in a few words. I want to see how you are reading this. Please note the next part of this story includes some dramatized details added to deepen the emotional impact. What matters is the lesson behind it. Constance had stood beside me through 42 years without once telling me what to do. She had offered opinions, suggested alternatives, played devil's advocate on 100 business decisions. But she had never once looked at me and told me there was only one path forward. She did it now. May 3rd has to be the day. Eugene. There won't be another chance. I looked at her. I looked at the invitation on my desk with its embossed logo and its handwritten seating assignment. I looked at the study window where the night was settling in over Summerlin. The same view I had watched from this chair for 20 years while building something my daughter never thought to ask about. Then I pulled out my phone and typed 2 words to Palmer. Confirmed. May 3. I pressed send. My thumb was steady. My throat was not. The metallic taste of a decision that cannot be reversed filled my mouth, and I swallowed once because my body understood what I had done before my mind finished processing it. Palmer's reply came in 11 seconds, the fastest he had ever responded to anything in 12 years of working together. 2 words back. Understood. Card is ready. I set the phone on the desk, his reply glowing in the lamplight. Constance read it from across the desk and nodded once. Somewhere across town. In the North Las Vegas building, whose ownership papers sat in my filing cabinet. My son-in-law was shutting down his computer for the night. He had spent another day asking questions about the mystery shareholder. He had walked past the executive conference room and found it empty. The attorneys gone. The frosted glass doors open and the chairs pushed in as if the meetings had never happened. He went home to my daughter and told her he thought it was probably nothing. It was not nothing. And in 48 hours, the nothing was going to walk through a restaurant door in a charcoal suit and say 7 words that would make the corner table the only seat in the room that mattered. 48 hours passed the way the last hours before anything irreversible always pass too slowly when you are watching the clock and too quickly when you realize that you cannot stop it. On the morning of May 3rd, at 9:14 a.m., my son-in-law walked past his own desk at Ridgeline Freight Solutions and saw a document sitting in the shared printer tray that was never meant for him. Landon told me this later, after everything. He had come in on a Saturday to clear paperwork before the dinner that evening. The office was skeleton crew. 2 dispatchers, a maintenance tech. The hum of the AC dialed down to weekend mode. The hallways smelled like toner and recycled paper, and the particular chemical emptiness of a building that runs at full capacity 5 days a week and holds its breath on the other 2. The memo was a single page. Internal shareholder transition notice, stamped with the previous day's date, referencing a controlling interest effective 8:58 a.m. The acquiring party's name was covered by a thick black redaction bar, the kind of bar that gets applied by legal departments when a document is cleared for internal distribution. But the identity behind it is still under NDA. Landon picked it up. He read it once. He read it again. He held it up to the fluorescent light as if he could read through the bar. He could not. Picture a man holding a piece of paper with his own future printed on it. Everything except the one name that would make it all make sense, and deciding he would deal with it Monday. Because tonight was supposed to be a celebration. He tried to reach someone. He called Ridgeline's legal department and got Saturday voicemail. He called compliance. Voicemail. He stood in the empty hallway outside the conference room where he had seen those unfamiliar attorneys 13 days earlier, and the frosted glass doors were open now. The chairs pushed in, the table bare. Whatever had been happening behind those doors had finished. The evidence was a single misrouted memo with a timestamp and a black rectangle where the answer should have been. 8:58 a.m. That was the timestamp on the page. The same timestamp Palmer had confirmed to me 21 days earlier. My son-in-law had been carrying my signature on a piece of paper all morning and did not know it. Landon folded the memo carefully, one clean crease down the center, the way a man folds something he intends to keep, and slid it into the breast pocket of the suit jacket hanging on the back of his office door. The jacket he would wear to dinner that night. He poured himself a cup of break room coffee. He told me later, it was burnt. Hours old. The taste of a man going through motions while his mind was circling a locked door he could not open. Then he went home to get ready for the evening his wife had spent 2 months planning. That afternoon, while tying his tie in the bathroom mirror at the Southern Highlands house, Landon called Garrett. The purpose was logistics. What time were the Thorntons arriving? Should he save parking? The usual coordination between brothers-in-law before a family event. But halfway through the call, Landon mentioned the memo. "You'll never believe this," he said. "I found a document at the office today. New controlling shareholder. Effective this morning. Name's blacked out. Nobody will tell me who it is." Garrett's voice, as he told me later, did not change. "That's weird," he said. "Any guesses?" When your brother-in-law makes a joke about your father being a corporate raider and you already know it true. What exactly does your laugh sound like? Garrett said it was the hardest thing he had ever done, not keeping my secret through dinner. Not watching Vivian arrange place cards and adjust centerpieces without knowing what was coming. But laughing at a joke that was, word for word, the truth. while the man telling it had no idea he was the only one not in on it. "Wouldn't it be wild?" Landon said, and Garrett could hear him grinning through the phone. "If your old man was the secret buyer, can you imagine Eugene Thornton, corporate raider? The man who drives a 12-year-old truck and wears the same jacket to every dinner." Garrett laughed. He told me later that the laugh came out genuine, which surprised him, because it was built on a foundation of something that should have made it impossible to laugh. The knowledge that in approximately 5 hours, herself, the man Landon was joking about, would be sitting in the smallest chair in a private dining room. And a man in a charcoal suit would walk through the door and turn that joke into the most accurate thing anyone said all day. "Yeah," Garrett said. "Can you imagine?" They both hung up laughing. Landon folded his tie, checked his collar, and patted the breast pocket of his jacket where the memo sat folded against his chest. He told me later he could feel it there all evening during the drive to the Palazzo, the hotel where Carnavino sits, during the cocktails, during Vivian's toast, during the word that changed everything. The paper pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat, and every time he shifted in his chair, he felt the edge of it through the fabric. The memo was still in his pocket when Palmer walked through the door. It was still in his pocket when he heard the 7 words. It was still in his pocket when he reached inside, unfolded it, and finally understood what the black bar had been hiding. But that was later. That afternoon, on the phone with Garrett, it was still a joke, the funniest thing either of them had heard all week. A 69-year-old man in a tweed sport coat, buying a freight company for the price of a small skyscraper. They laughed. Neither of them knew the joke was the truth. That joke stayed with me. Garrett called an hour after he hung up with Landon and told me about it. And the way his voice caught in the retelling told me everything I needed to know about the weight he was carrying. His brother-in-law had guessed the truth out loud, laughed at it, and moved on. And my son had laughed with him, knowing the punchline was real. No, the next 6 hours would prove it. There are conversations you rehearse for weeks, and conversations that come out exactly right because you have been living them for 20 years. Telling Garrett the truth was the second kind. He came over at 4 o'clock. I closed the study door the same click it made when I told Constance. The same room. The same late afternoon light slanting through the blinds. Garrett sat in the chair across from my desk and I told him everything. Not just the acquisition, not just Palmer's role, everything. The notebook, the 5 entries, the 3 witnesses Palmer had contacted, the business card, the 7 words, the timing at 8:35. I told him the acquisition was not a weapon. It was a mirror. I did not buy Ridgeline to destroy Landon's career. I bought it to force Vivian to see who she had been erasing, and to make sure she saw it in a room where the evidence could not be rewritten. I want you to understand what it costs to tell your son that you own his brother-in-law's company, and then ask him to sit at a dinner table for 2 hours pretending he does not know. That is not a favor, that is a weight. And I put it on him because he was the only person strong enough to carry it quietly. Palmer walks in at 8:35, I said. Business card on the table. 7 words. After that, the room decides what it means. And you, Garrett said, what do you do? I sit in the chair your sister picked for me, and I wait. He was quiet for a long time. The study clock ticked. The blinds shifted. What happens to Landon's job after this? That depends on tonight. I didn't buy the company to punish an innocent man. But I need Vivian to understand who she's been erasing. Garrett leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the way he does when he is processing something that has more weight than he expected. You've been carrying this alone for weeks. Not alone. Your mother knows, Palmer knows, and now you know. That's enough. He nodded. He did not argue. He did not try to talk me out of it. He did not suggest a softer approach or a private conversation or a letter instead of a public reveal. He understood. The way only someone who has watched the same pattern for 7 years and finally been given a name for it can understand. That this was not about anger. This was about being seen. Garrett left at 5:15. I walked him to the front door and put my hand on his shoulder the way I had 2 days earlier. Brief, firm, carrying the things I could not say. He looked at me and said, "I'll be at the table next to yours tonight, close enough to hear everything." "That's all I'm asking." "No," he said. "That's all you've ever asked." Constance straightened my tie the way she had before 1,000 business dinners, except tonight, the business was family, and the deal was 7 years overdue. I stood in front of the hallway mirror in the tweed sport coat I had worn for 11 years. It hung in the closet next to suits that cost 10 times more. But I chose it because it was the coat Vivian had told me not to wear. And tonight, I intended to be exactly the man she did not want me to be. Constance's fingers worked the knot with the muscle memory of 4 decades. Her hands smelled like lavender. The house was quiet around us. No television, no music, just the sound of fabric adjusting and the low hum of the evening settling in. 7 years, Eugene, she said. You've been patient for 7 years. 1 more hour won't hurt. Are you scared? She asked if I was scared, and I told her the truth. I was not. Fear belongs to men who do not know what is on the other side of the door. I had been standing on the other side for 3 weeks, waiting for someone to open it. "No," I said. "I'm tired. There's a difference. Scared means you don't know what's coming. Tired means you've known for too long." She finished the knot. She smoothed my lapels. She looked at me in the mirror, standing behind me, her chin barely reaching my shoulder. And for a moment we were 25 again, getting ready for a dinner we could not afford, at a restaurant we had no business being in. And I loved her so completely that the 7 years of silence between my daughter and me shrank to the size of something I could hold in one hand. "It won't be silent," I said. "I just won't be the one who speaks." We walked to the car in the last of the desert light, that particular amber that turns everything in Summerlin into something out of a photograph. Constance reached across the center console, palm up, the way she has 10,000 times. I took her hand. Neither of us spoke for the first 3 miles. Tires on asphalt. The soft hum of the AC. The dry, warm scent of a May evening in Las Vegas coming through the cracked window. Then she said quietly, "The corner table." I nodded. The corner table. We pulled into the Palazzo Valet lane at 6:47 p.m. Palmer would arrive at 8:35. My daughter had no idea that the last 90 minutes of the life she had built on my invisibility had already started counting down. The hostess at Carnavino recognized Vivian before we had cleared the entrance. My daughter had been here 3 times that week, perfecting seating arrangements for a party celebrating a man whose company I already owned. Vivian met us at the threshold of the private dining room. She wore a black dress and a smile that had been rehearsed in a mirror. She took my arm the way you take the arm of someone you are guiding, not someone you are welcoming. "Dad, I saved you a spot where it's quieter. You hate crowds." "Thoughtful," I said. She walked me to the corner. The table was exactly where Palmer had described it. A 2-top pressed against the exposed brick wall, wedged between the kitchen service door and the emergency exit. 22 feet from the head table where Boyd Prescott was already seated beside an empty chair waiting for Landon. I could hear the kitchen staff through the door, pans clattering, a chef calling out temperatures. The noise was deliberate. My daughter had placed me where conversation would be difficult and attention would be impossible. Constance watched from behind us. "Where would you like me?" Vivian, "At the main table. Mom, your family." The sentence landed the way Vivian intended it to. Casually, warmly, as if the man she had just seated by the kitchen was not family, but furniture. Constance caught my eye across the room as she took her seat. Her jaw was set. She sat down beside Vivian's empty chair at the main table. exactly where she had told me she wanted to be. My daughter had no idea she had just placed her mother in the front row. Have you ever sat in a chair that someone picked specifically because it was the smallest one in the room and known, with absolute certainty, that it was the last time you would ever sit where someone else told you to? Garrett arrived 3 minutes after us. He surveyed the room the way I had taught him to survey rooms quietly, measuring distances, noting exits. Then he pulled a chair to the table beside mine, close enough that I could hear breathe. "Mind if I sit here?" he said to Vivian. "Better view." She was already turning away. "Suit yourself." I unfolded my napkin. The linen was crisp and white and smelled like starch and bread. Across the room, Boyd Prescott shook Landon's hand as my son-in-law took the seat of honor. The Ridgeline executives filled in around them 3 regional directors, 2 consulting partners, the full architecture of a company that reported to me, through a chain of signatures none of them had seen. 22 feet. That is how far she put me from the man who reports to me. The dinner lasted 90 minutes before it happened. Appetizers, small talk, wine I did not touch. I drank water and watched the room the way a man watches a clock he has already set. Constance sat beside Vivian at the main table, speaking when spoken to, her hand beneath the tablecloth, gripping the edge of the linen so tightly I could see the tension in her forearm from across the room. Garrett sat beside me and ate his steak and said nothing. Landon moved through the evening with the confidence of a man who had no reason to doubt anything, his jacket pocket pressed against his chest, where the folded memo sat. Forgotten for now. A question he had decided to save for Monday. Then the main course was cleared. Vivian stood. She stood the way prosecutors stand for closing arguments, except the jury was a private dining room full of people who worked for the man she did not know was sitting here at the corner table because he chose to be. She picked up her wine glass. The chandelier backlit her silhouette. The room went quiet, the way rooms do when someone claims the floor with enough authority that silence becomes automatic. "I want to say a few words about my husband," she began. She smiled at Landon. He smiled back. Landon built Ridgeline from nothing. No handouts, no family money, no one handing him anything he didn't earn. She paused. She looked at me. The look was not accidental. It was aimed. Despite carrying a parasite for 7 years who's never contributed a single dollar to this family, I want you to hear that word the way I heard it. Parasite. With the hard P and the silence after, the kind of silence that only happens when everyone in a room realizes simultaneously that someone has gone too far and no one knows what to do about it. Silverware stopped. Glasses froze mid-lift. Boyd Prescott set his bourbon on the table with the careful precision of a man who needed both hands free to process what he had just heard. The Ridgeline executives exchanged glances. Landon half rose from his chair. "Viv, that's enough." "No," she said, and her voice carried the bright certainty of someone who has never been contradicted in a room she is paying for. "They should know. Everyone in this room should know exactly who my father is." Constance gripped her napkin under the table. I could see her knuckles from 22 feet away. She leaned toward Garrett, who had not moved, whose fingers were pressed into his own knee hard enough to leave marks. "Don't move," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. I set down my water glass. The cool weight left my fingers, and the glass touched the tablecloth without a sound. I looked at my watch. 8:30. 5 minutes. 30 people had just heard my daughter call me a parasite. And not one of them, not Vivian, not Landon, not Boyd Prescott, understood why the old man at the corner table was the only person in the room who was not shocked. I was not shocked because I had known this moment was coming since April. And what was coming next made this moment irrelevant. 5 minutes passed the way the last 5 minutes of anything irreversible pass 1 second at a time, each one heavier than the last. Vivian was still standing with her glass half raised when the door to the private dining room opened at exactly 8:35 p.m. Every plan I had built over 3 weeks walked in wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a leather folio. Palmer did not hesitate. He did not scan the room or pause at the threshold or look for me in the corner. He walked in the way a man walks when he has rehearsed a route until the steps are automatic past the Ridgeline executives. Past Garrett, past Constance, his shoes striking the hardwood in a rhythm so deliberate and unhurried that it became the only sound in the room. Every head turned to follow him. Every fork stopped. Vivian saw him first. "Excuse me," she said, her glass still in her hand. "This is a private event." Palmer did not break stride. "Yes, ma'am, I'm aware." He walked directly to the head table. He stopped beside Vivian's plate, and with 2 fingers, aligned perfectly parallel to the table edge, he placed a single white business card face up on the cream tablecloth. The card was simple. My name, my title, the holding company. Nothing else. Vivian looked down at it the way you look at something that does not belong in the world you have constructed. The way you look at a crack in a wall you thought was solid. I need you to understand how a room changes when 30 people realize simultaneously that the man they have been ignoring all night owns the company they all work for. It is not a gasp. It is not a shout. It is the sound of every assumption in the room dying at the same time, a silence so complete it has texture, weight, the quality of a held breath multiplied by 30. Landon recognized Palmer before Vivian did. My son-in-law had seen this man walking through the Ridgeline corridors for weeks, the unfamiliar attorney behind the closed conference room doors. The face attached to the due diligence meetings no one would explain. "Palmer," Landon said. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "What are you doing here?" "Delivering a message, Mr. Harding." Vivian picked up the card. She read it once. She read it again. Her fingers went white around the edges of the cardstock. "Thornton Equity Partners," she said. "What is this?" She looked across the room at me. "Dad, what is this?" I did not answer. I did not need to. Palmer turned to face the room. He stood with his hands at his sides, his voice clear and level, pitched to carry without effort to every corner of the private dining room. "Apologies for the interruption. Ridgeline Freight Solutions reports directly to Mr. Thornton." 7 words. That is all Palmer said. 7 words undid 7 years. The silence that followed was not the kind of silence where people are thinking. It was the kind where people have stopped. Silverware motionless on plates. Wine glasses suspended. Boyd Prescott set his fork down on the tablecloth with the slow precision of a man recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the room he was sitting in. He leaned toward the executive beside him. And what he said was quiet, but carried in the stillness the way a match carries in a dark room. "Thornton, the man at the corner table, she just called him a parasite." The Ridgeline executives turned. Not one at a time, all of them. In unison, as if pulled by the same string, they turned toward the corner table, toward the smallest chair, toward the man in the 11-year-old sport coat who had been sitting by the kitchen door all evening, drinking water, saying nothing, while his daughter told the room he was worthless. I did not stand. I did not speak. I met my daughter's eyes from 22 feet away, and I held them. Have you ever watched someone reach for the inside pocket of their jacket and realize they have been carrying the answer to the question that just destroyed their wife's entire performance, and that the answer has been sitting against their heartbeat since before the appetizers arrived? Landon's hand moved. It was involuntary, the gesture of a man whose body understood before his mind caught up. His right hand went to the breast pocket of his suit jacket, where the folded memo had been pressed against his chest all evening. The memo with the timestamp. The memo with the black bar where the acquiring party's name should have been. He pulled it out. He unfolded it. He looked at the redaction, that thick black rectangle he had held up to the fluorescent light that morning, trying to read through it. And now he did not need to read through it. The name behind the bar was sitting in a corner chair 22 feet away. The black bar, Landon said. His voice was barely audible. That was you. I looked at my son-in-law. I looked at the memo in his hands. I looked at my daughter, who was still holding the business card, the way you hold something that has burned you, but you cannot put down, because putting it down would mean admitting it is real. Vivian turned to face me. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. 22 feet of private dining room separated the woman who had called me a parasite from the man who had just been revealed as the owner of everything her husband had built. I did not stand. I did not need to. The corner table, the smallest chair, the farthest seat. The place she had chosen to make me invisible had become the only seat in the room that mattered. Boyd Prescott was the first to move, in a room where 30 people had forgotten how to breathe. A 58-year-old managing partner pushed back his chair, stood, and walked the full length of the private dining room toward the smallest table, as if it had just become the head of the entire building. Every head in the room tracked him. 22 feet of white linen and stunned faces. And Boyd crossed it without hesitation. He stopped in front of my corner table, extended his hand, and said 2 words that reorganized the hierarchy of the room. Chairman Thornton. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, professional. The grip of a man recalibrating who his boss was in real time. I should have made the connection sooner, he said. The due diligence team mentioned Thornton Equity, but I never... That was intentional. Boyd, please sit. 2 Ridgeline executives followed within seconds. They crossed the dining room in Boyd's wake, moving toward my table the way iron filings move toward a magnet pulled by a force that had been there all evening but had only just been switched on. They introduced themselves to me as if I were someone new. I was not someone new. I was someone they had been sitting 30 feet from for 90 minutes without being told to look. Landon stood at the head table. He had not moved. He watched the men who reported to him walk past his wife and cross the room to shake the hand of the man she had just called a parasite. His right hand was still inside his jacket pocket. And now he pulled the memo out, completely unfolded it with both hands. The black redaction bar visible even in the candlelight. Watching Landon unfold that memo was like watching a man read his own autopsy report. He already knew something was wrong. He just had not known the cause of death was standing in the corner, wearing a tweed sport coat. The black bar, Landon said. He was not speaking to anyone in particular. He was speaking to the document. The redacted name on the acquisition memo. It was you the entire time. I looked at him across the room and nodded once. Vivian's voice cracked the silence. Landon, did you know? He did not look at her. No, Vivian, I didn't. But I should have. The plates on the tables had gone cold. Steak congealing in sauce no one would touch. Wine glasses abandoned at various heights. The private dining room had taken on the particular staleness of a room where 30 people had stopped eating and started holding their breath. And the breath had not been released yet. I stood up, for the first time all evening. I rose from the smallest chair in the room. The tweed sport coat was creased from 90 minutes of sitting. I did not smooth it. I did not adjust my collar. I stood because I had to, not for the power of it. Not for the theater, but because there are sentences you cannot deliver from a seated position. And telling your daughter that you own everything she thought made her better than you is one of them. I spoke quietly. Quietly enough that the room had to lean in, which is what I wanted. Because truth should not need volume. It should need attention. I didn't come here to embarrass you. Vivian. She was still holding the business card. Her fingers were white around the edges. I came here because you used that word in front of 30 people, and I thought you should know. The man you called a parasite signed the papers that own this company. He paid for this dinner. He is sitting in the chair you picked because it was the smallest one in the room. I paused. The silence was absolute. I could hear the kitchen behind the service door, a chef calling a temperature. the mundane machinery of a restaurant continuing to function while the private dining room had stopped. "I never wanted you to find out this way," I said, quieter now, and the room leaned further. "You chose that for both of us about 4 minutes ago." I could have said more. I had more to say. 7 years of notebook entries, and 3 witness statements, and a 40-year career that had been erased one dinner party at a time. I had enough material for an hour. But the plan had always included a guardrail. And the guardrail was sitting at the main table with her hands folded and her jaw set. Constance said 2 words. She said them from the main table, steady and clear, cutting through the silence the way a knife cuts through linen clean. Precise. Final. "Sit down, Eugene. You've said enough." I sat. Because she was right. Because she has always been right. Because the difference between justice and cruelty is knowing exactly when to stop talking. And Constance had always known that better than I had. I picked up my water glass. The weight of it was cool and familiar in my hand. I took a sip. The water tasted the way water always tastes when you have just said the hardest thing you have ever said out loud flat. Mineral. Clean. The taste of something finished. Vivian's hands were shaking. Not from anger. Not yet. From the specific tremor that comes when every lie you have told yourself for 7 years collapses into a single, provable fact at the same time. She looked at Landon. Landon was still holding the unfolded memo with both hands, the black bar staring up at him in the candlelight. He looked at the memo. He looked at me. He looked at his wife. And in his eyes I could see the arithmetic happening. Every closed-door meeting at Ridgeline. Every time Palmer appeared in the corridor. Every question no one would answer. The joke he had made to Garrett that afternoon about the old man being the secret buyer. The joke that was the truth. The memo that was the proof. And the man at the corner table who had been both all along. The sound a chair makes when someone stands too fast in a quiet room is unmistakable. It is the sound of someone choosing flight over everything else. And my daughter made that choice in front of 30 witnesses. Vivian's chair scraped backward against the hardwood sudden, violent in the silence, and she grabbed her clutch from the table with fingers so white they looked bloodless. She did not look at Landon. She did not look at Boyd Prescott or the Ridgeline executives who had just crossed the room to shake my hand. She looked straight ahead, the way a person looks when they are walking through a room they have decided no longer exists. And she moved toward the exit. But she did not make it past the corner table without stopping. She paused. Her heels stopped clicking. She was close enough that I could smell the perfume she had put on that morning when she thought this evening was going to be the best night of her life. She turned her head just enough to speak, her voice low, barely audible, meant for me and no one else, though Constance and Garrett heard it too. "You planned this," she said. "You sat there and you let me—" "I sat where you put me." "Vivian, do you know what it sounds like when your daughter walks past you for what might be the last honest moment you will ever share and chooses to accuse you of planning it all? Instead of admitting she chose every word herself, it sounds like a door closing. Not slamming, just closing, with the quiet finality of someone who is not ready to hear the thing they most need to hear." She walked out. Her heels clicked a retreating rhythm across the hardwood, sharp and precise. The footsteps of a woman who had spent her adult life controlling exactly how she moved through rooms and was now moving through this one for the last time. The private dining room door swung shut behind her. Through it, I caught a last glimpse of her heels on the marble beyond the threshold. Then she was gone. The room began to empty. Guests excused themselves in murmured pairs, the universal choreography of people who have witnessed something they were not supposed to see and now need to be anywhere else. Plates went cold, wine oxidized in abandoned glasses. The chandelier kept casting the same warm light it had cast all evening, indifferent to the fact that the evening had ended. Constance appeared at my side. She had crossed from the main table without my noticing, and her hand rested on my shoulder lightly, steadying, smelling of the lavender hand cream she had used for 20 years. "Let her go," she said. "She needs to hear herself think for the first time in 7 years." Garrett looked at the door. "Should I?" "No," I said. "She has to come back on her own, or it means nothing." The room thinned until it was nearly empty. Palmer had left immediately after delivering the 7 words, as planned. Boyd Prescott had shaken my hand a second time on his way out and said he would call my office Monday morning. The Ridgeline directors followed him in a quiet file, each one nodding at me as they passed the corner table. The smallest table. The table that 15 minutes ago had been invisible and was now the only address in the room anyone would remember. Then it was just Landon and me. He crossed the room the way employees approach a new CEO on the first day, measuring every step, calculating what to say, holding the unfolded memo in both hands, like a document he now understood had been his letter of introduction to a man he had eaten Thanksgiving dinner with for 6 years. He stopped in front of my table. He set the memo down on the tablecloth between us. The black bar stared up from the page, meaningless now that every question it had been hiding had been answered by 7 words and a business card. "Do I still have a job?" he said. It was the only question that mattered to him, and I respected him for asking it directly. "You built the logistics division from 14 routes to over 200. That is not something I would undo to make a point." His shoulders dropped, not with defeat, with relief, the particular relief of a man who had just discovered that the earthquake he felt was not aimed at him. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what she said, for all of it. I should have seen—" I raised my hand. "Don't. I want you to know that the hardest part of that entire evening was not the word my daughter used. It was telling a decent man that I would not let him carry his wife's shame. Because the moment you accept someone else's apology for a wrong they did not commit, you give the person who did it permission to never face what they have done. You don't apologize for someone else," I said. "That's her debt, not yours." He stood there for a moment, the memo between us on the tablecloth, the dining room empty around us except for Constance and Garrett at my shoulder. Then I said the last thing I would say that evening. "But your family needs to start telling the truth. All of you. Including Vivian, especially Vivian." Landon folded the memo. He put it back in his jacket pocket, pressed against his chest again, the same place it had been all night, but meaning something entirely different now. He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm and deliberate, the grip of a man who had just learned who signed his paychecks and had decided to stand rather than kneel. He walked out through the private dining room door, through the gap before it closed. I could hear Vivian's voice in the corridor, sharp, defensive, already rewriting the evening into a version where she was ambushed rather than exposed. Constance touched my shoulder again. "She'll call," she said. "Give her a week." I was not sure a week would be enough. I was not sure a year would be. How long does it take a person to stop lying to themselves? 8 days, 8 months, or the exact amount of time between being called out in a room full of witnesses and running out of ways to pretend it didn't happen. Constance was wrong about the week. Day 1 passed in silence. Day 2, day 3, no call, no text, no visit. The house in Summerlin South settled into the particular quiet of a place where 2 people are waiting for a phone that does not ring. I called Palmer on the 3rd morning. Not about Vivian, and about Ridgeline. Whatever had happened at that dinner was between my daughter and me. But 1,100 employees had nothing to do with a family reckoning, and I would not let it bleed into their paychecks. Landon came in Monday morning, Palmer said. Closed his office door for an hour. Then he worked a full day, no disruption. No one at Ridgeline knows what happened except Boyd. Keep it that way. I had spent weeks preparing for the possibility that Landon would crumble, retaliate, or resign. Instead, he closed a door, sat with whatever he needed to sit with, and went back to work. He ran his division the same way on Monday as the previous Friday. The man I had worried about punishing turned out to be the one person in the room who never needed punishing at all. There is a particular kind of silence that fills a house when you are waiting for your child to decide whether she is going to be honest with you for the first time in 7 years. It does not sound empty. It sounds like every room is holding its breath. The kitchen held it, the hallway held it, the back patio where Constance and I drank coffee every morning held it with the patience of desert air that has been still for 1,000 years. Day 6. Constance sat beside me on the patio, the midday light flat and white, and asked the only question she had been carrying. Do you regret the timing? The timing was hers. Constance. She picked the word. She picked the audience. I just made sure the truth was in the room when she did. She nodded. She did not argue or comfort. She drank her coffee and watched the dry hills beyond the fence and let the silence do what silence does, which is make space for whatever comes next. Day 8 came and went. I stopped checking my phone. Constance stopped predicting. We both understood our daughter was either rewriting the story or reading it clearly for the first time, and we could not control which. On day 11, I heard the front door open without a knock. I was in the kitchen. My hands moved before my brain did. I pulled a second mug from the cabinet and filled it. The same reflex I had had since Vivian was 16 and came downstairs barefoot for Saturday coffee. Some things the body remembers even when the mind has stopped expecting them. She appeared in the doorway. I need you to understand that when my daughter walked into that room, she was not performing. I have watched Vivian perform for 7 years, and I know exactly what it looks like. The posture, the voice pitched for an audience, the calculated warmth, with an exit strategy. This was something I had never seen from her, and it was the terrifying possibility that she might actually mean it. Her face had no makeup. It was the first time I had seen her without it in years. She looked older and more honest, which turned out to be the same thing. She was carrying a cloth-covered journal with frayed edges. She set it on the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten breakfast every morning of those 11 days, and sat across from me. I didn't come to apologize, she said. I came to show you something I've never shown anyone. She opened the journal. The pages turned with a soft rasp, carrying a faint scent of cedar. She found a page dated 3 years earlier. Landon's mother asked about your work at Thanksgiving. I changed the subject. I've been changing the subject for 6 years. She turned more pages. Entry after entry. Each one a small record of shame, not the shame of having a father who built engines, but the shame of being a woman who believed that fact needed hiding. What do you say to your daughter when she shows you a journal full of entries about being ashamed of the man who raised her? And every entry is written in the handwriting of someone more ashamed of herself than she ever was of you. I wasn't trying to erase you because I hated you, she said. Her hands were flat on the table, pressed down like she was holding herself in place. I was trying to erase you because every time someone saw you, the sport coat, the old car, the way you talk about engines, I thought they were seeing proof that I didn't belong in Landon's world. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I had never lifted it. You didn't belong in Landon's world, I said. You belonged in ours. That was never something to fix. She closed her eyes, not crying, just closed. The way a person closes their eyes when they hear something they have known for a long time and are only now allowing themselves to receive. I can't give you a roadmap, Vivian. I don't have one, but I can tell you where to start. Where? Stop telling a false story about your family. That's where you start. She closed the journal but did not take it with her. She left it on the kitchen table with its frayed cloth cover facing up and walked out the same door she had come through 12 minutes earlier. I sat there looking at it and understood she had not brought it to show me who she was. She had brought it to leave behind. The way you leave behind the version of yourself you cannot carry anymore. Constance found me an hour later, still sitting at the table, the journal unopened in front of me. 2 days after my daughter left her journal on my kitchen table. I sat in the same chair and signed a document that separated love from authority in a single paragraph. I had not opened the journal. It sat where Vivian left it, cloth cover facing up, frayed corners catching the light every morning when I came in for coffee. Constance never asked me to move it. She walked past it the way you walk past something that belongs exactly where it is. On the 14th of May, after weeks of paperwork drafted and revised behind the scenes, my estate attorney spread 3 pages across the home office desk, and I picked up a pen that felt heavier than any I had held in 40 years of signing contracts. Because this one reorganized my family, not my business. The attorney asked if I wanted to remove Vivian entirely. I said no. She is my daughter. She eats at my table for the rest of her life. But she does not get to sit at the head of it. Not until she earns the chair back. The trust restructure gave Garrett the leadership succession plan for Thornton Equity Partners. It gave Vivian a fixed financial share she would always be provided for, always protected, because that is what fathers do. But every decision-making seat was removed until trust was rebuilt, not punished, rebalanced. Signing that document felt like building a fence around a garden you still love. Not to keep anyone out, but to make sure the person who trampled it last time has to come through the gate and ask permission before she walks on it again. I called Garrett afterward. He picked up on the second ring the way he always does. My son answers the phone like a man who expects the call to matter. "I'm putting your name on the succession plan," I said. "Not because you're my son, because you showed up when it mattered and you didn't flinch." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing. Then he said, "I didn't do anything, Dad." "Exactly. You witnessed. That was the hardest job in the room." I signed the last page at 3:14 in the afternoon. The attorney gathered his copies and left through the front door. I sat in the office for 10 minutes looking through the open doorway at Vivian's journal, still on the kitchen table. Love and authority. I had spent 69 years thinking they were the same thing. They are not. Love says you will always have a place here. Authority says you have to earn the key. 2 days later, I drove to Ridgeline Freight in North Las Vegas. The building still smelled the way logistics companies smell diesel. Rubber, the industrial soap they use on loading dock floors. The company logo on the lobby wall was the same logo that had been there when Boyd Prescott ran it. The same logo that now belonged to me. Though the 200 employees gathered in this warehouse bay did not need to think about that. They needed to think about one thing. I drove to my son-in-law's company, the company I own, and told those employees that the man running it deserved to keep running it. I need you to understand that was the easiest decision I made all month. Because competence does not lie to you at dinner parties. Landon stood beside me at the front of the bay. I kept it short. "I'm here to tell you one thing," I said. "Your leadership isn't changing. Landon Harding built this operation, and Landon Harding runs it. Ownership changes paperwork. It doesn't change who earned the right to be in this building every morning." 200 faces looked at Landon. He nodded once. He did not smile. He did not give a speech. He stood there the way competent men stand when they have been told publicly that their work matters still. Grateful and ready to get back to it. Afterward, we walked the hallway toward his office. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A secretary I had never met offered me water from the break room. Not knowing the man drinking it owned the building. The water tasted like every break room in every warehouse I have ever visited, flat, cold, honest. "You didn't have to come here personally," Landon said. "Yes, I did. Your people needed to hear it from the man whose name is on the acquisition, not from a memo with a black bar on it." He almost smiled at that. Almost. Then the smile faded, and something more serious took its place. "Do you trust me?" Landon asked me that question standing in a hallway of the company I had bought to expose his wife. And I gave him the only honest answer a 69-year-old man can give after watching his daughter call him a parasite and his son-in-law extend a handshake in the Same hour. I trust what I can verify. Everything else takes time. I trust competence, I said. Family trust, that's a different conversation. He took it. He did not argue. He shook my hand steadier than the one at Carnavino, earned in a different way, and walked into his office and closed the door. Through the window, I could see him sit down at his desk and pull a shipping manifest toward him. Back to work. Back to the 206 routes he had built from 14. The man was decent. Decency, I have learned, is the thing you cannot teach and cannot fake and cannot buy. And Landon Harding had it, in a family that had been running short. I drove home on the 215, the same freeway I have taken 10,000 times. The May sunset turning the desert the color of rust and copper. When I pulled into the driveway, Constance was standing at the front door holding her phone. "Vivian just called," she said. "She wants to bring the children over for Sunday dinner. She asked if you'd be willing to sit at the same table." I turned off the engine. Sunday dinner. The same table. It was not an apology. It was a beginning. And beginnings, I have learned, are harder. Sunday came the way Sundays do in a house that has been holding its breath slowly, with too much morning light, and the smell of something constant started cooking before I woke up. Vivian brought the children. She brought Landon. She sat at the same table, and she did not perform. That dinner is not part of this story because some things belong to a family and not to an audience. What I can tell you is that it was a beginning, and beginnings are harder than endings, because endings only ask you to let go. Beginnings ask you to hold on without knowing what you are holding. 2 weeks later, at that same kitchen table, I signed a 3-page document that changed the trajectory of my family's next 50 years. The table still had a faint ring from Vivian's coffee cup the Sunday before. Her journal was gone. Constance had moved it to the bedroom closet, not hidden, but placed. The way you place something that matters, in a location where it can be found when someone is ready. Garrett sat across from me. Constance stood at the counter, pouring coffee into 3 mugs. Black for me, cream for her, sugar for Garrett. The same preferences for 30 years. The document named Garrett Vice Chairman of Thornton Equity Partners. No lawyers, no photographers, just a father, a son, and a mother who had been right about both her children all along. Garrett looked at the pages. He read his own name next to the title and then looked up at me. "You didn't have to do this, Dad. I would have been fine without a title." "I know. But I spent 7 years being invisible to one child. I'm not going to let the other one be invisible to me. I want you to remember that the same kitchen table where my daughter left a journal full of shame is the table where I handed my son the future of the family. Neither of those things would have happened if a woman in a private dining room had not used one word in front of 30 people, who now know exactly what that word really means." Constance set the mugs down and sat beside Garrett. "Your father has been planning this since April," she said. "The only thing that changed is he's doing it with a clear conscience instead of a heavy one." Garrett signed. The pen was quieter than the one I had used for the trust restructure lighter. The sound of something being built instead of something being rebalanced. He set the pen down and looked at me. "What do I do first?" "You already did it. You sat in a chair at Carnavino and you didn't move. Everything after that is paperwork." He reached across the table and shook my hand. It was not a business grip. It was a son holding his father's hand for a beat longer than necessary, and I held it back. And Constance watched us from across the table with the expression of a woman who has spent 41 years building something and has just seen it stand on its own. 3 days later, my phone buzzed once. Vivian's name on the screen, 1 line of text. I told them the truth. It felt lighter than I expected. Do you know what a 4-letter reply looks like on a phone screen when it is the first honest thing you have sent your daughter in 7 years? It looks like the smallest word in the language carrying the entire weight of a family deciding to start over. I typed 1 word. Good. 1 word. 4 letters. It was the most I could give her right then and the least she deserved, and somehow it was exactly enough for both of us. Constance read the text over my shoulder. "She's starting," she said. "Starting is all I asked for." That evening I sat on the back patio. Constance joined me the way she has 10,000 times. Same chair, same reach across the armrest, same hand finding mine without looking. The pool lights had come on, and they turned everything blue and gold. The way Summerlin looks after sunset, when the desert sky fades from orange to violet, and the rooftops go dark against the spring mountains. The air smelled like warm concrete and jasmine from the neighbor's fence and the chlorine-clean scent of pool water, which is what May in Las Vegas smells like when you have lived here long enough to stop noticing and then one evening notice again. "Do you think she'll ever stop being ashamed?" Constance asked. "I think she already has." The shame was never about me, it was about her. Once she stopped carrying it, she could see me again. The pool lights in Summerlin turn everything blue and gold after sunset. And sitting there, I realized that is what the last 7 weeks had done to my family. Taken something that looked one color in the dark and lit it from underneath until you could finally see what it actually was. Somewhere in Southern Highlands, my daughter was telling the truth about her father for the first time. Somewhere in North Las Vegas, my son-in-law was running a company that had my name on the paperwork and his sweat on every route. My son had a title he had earned by sitting still in a room where everyone else was falling apart. My wife had her hand in mine the way she always has, steady and warm and certain. The word was still out there. You cannot take a word back once it has been said in a room full of people. But you can change what it means. You can let it sit in the air long enough that everyone who heard it starts to wonder whether the woman who said it was describing the man across the room or confessing something about herself. Constance squeezed my hand. The pool pump hummed. A neighbor's sprinklers clicked on somewhere in the dark. Sometimes the one they call a parasite is the only one who ever fed the room, not with words, but with everything he chose never to boast about. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 7 years smiling through dinners where my own daughter treated me like I did not belong in the room. I let it go on too long. I told myself patience was the same as wisdom. But patience without a plan is just silence. And silence gave her permission to keep erasing me. Do not make my mistake. Do not wait 7 years to remind the people you love who you actually are. This was never a revenge story about punishing my daughter. Some people hear what happened at that dinner and call it revenge. I understand why. But a real revenge story ends with someone destroyed. And I did not want destruction. I wanted the truth back on the table. The lesson I learned is that the people who try to erase you are usually hiding something about themselves. And the hardest part is not exposing them. It is loving them after you do. I believe God put me through this to teach me that love and authority are not the same thing. You can hand someone your whole heart and still say no. You do not get to sit at the head of this table until you have earned the chair. That is not cruelty. That is grace with a boundary. If this story moved you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments, was I right to do what I did? Or would you have handled it differently? If you know someone who needs to hear this message, share it with them. And if this is your first time here, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next story. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Some details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling and privacy. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. The message that is the part I hope stays with you. God bless you all.